along with my wife Shannon. There she is right there. So I wanted to just thank everyone for coming. I know we have some former elected officials here with us. I wanted to thank you for taking the time. Also, really want to thank Pat and Roland Rebely right here for sponsoring this for us. Thank you very much. Very generous. I also wanted to take a few minutes and thank some of our other co-sponsors, the Democratic Women's Club, the Santa Cruz Women's March, the Democratic Club of North Santa Cruz County, and the PV Cesar Chavez Democratic Club. So thank you for your co-sponsorship and your support. Also want to thank Trink Braxel and Lisa Rose. Are you guys there? There's Trink. Thank you for all the hard work. They've done a great job with a lot of folks here for Santa Cruz Indivisible. So thank you. Okay, inside your program, you're going to see an event card for our September 8th event. It should be like a postcard. And in it, it's going to give you information about our next weekend's event at the Santa Cruz Civic. Just a quick question, show of hands, how many people are aware of that event that's going to be coming up? Just want to get a sense of that. Okay, great. So the event is going to consist of two different parts. In the morning, we're going to have a general meeting for Santa Cruz Indivisible. Everybody's welcome. We're going to be talking about our 2019 and 2020 efforts, which include a project called Citizenship 2.0. It includes what we're going to do in our electoral efforts for 2019, then of course for the 2020 electoral efforts. So we'll be talking about some of that. But then in the afternoon, we're going to be talking about our Blue Wave events for this year's electoral efforts for the midterms. So that will be taking place from 1 to 5. And we, in particular, Santa Cruz Indivisible, are working on California Districts 21 and 22. And then because we're also a part of a larger group of progressive organizations all throughout Northern California, and other groups are working on CA1, CA4, 7, 10, etc. So we're putting our juice there because of our physical proximity. But we also work very closely with our friends at Swing Left. Renee Block, is Renee here? There he is, he's back there in the back. He and his folks with the Swing Left and some of the other folks from Santa Cruz Indivisible have just done a tremendous amount of work there, canvassing and a bunch of door knocking. So anyway, good job. But we are going to be having our event on this upcoming Saturday to invite people to come and learn how to do some of this electoral stuff. So if you're interested in learning how to phone bank or text bank or write postcards or canvass or even going in district and helping with getting out the vote towards the election day, then come and check us out and you can sign up and we'll get you plugged in. But we'd like to stand up, a couple hundred volunteers to do that. So come and check it out. Additionally, on the program, if you flip your program over on the back, we have a number of other events that are coming up. So you'll see some of our electoral events on the back of the program, plus you'll see a few more just Santa Cruz Indivisible events. I think there's some wine and signs that are coming up where people come to various wine bars and get together and postcard and hang out. It's fun. Anyway, so lots of stuff going on there. Oh yeah, be sure and vote. Make sure you get everybody you know to vote. These guys, I think, have a few things to talk about voting, so we'll get to that in just a minute. Anyway, so I'm going to pass this over to John Laird. I think probably everybody in this room knows who John is. He has just had a tremendous number of years of service in just a variety of different ways. So I could go into it, but we don't have the time. Everybody, yeah, exactly. So anyway, thank you, John, and thank you, Secretary. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carson, and everybody that worked on this, and thank all of you for being here. I think the fact that this is the Friday night of Labor Day weekend and there are this many people here backing this just shows the interest in this topic and in elections this year. There's so much going on that we want to get to in our discussion, from potential hacking attempts into the electoral system, allegations of voter fraud, other states' policies or laws on voter identification, the President's so-called Committee on Voter Practices, election practices on same-day registration, voter centers, and the purging of inactive voters. And hovering over all of this is really the level of participation that we can encourage and have in our democracy. Tonight, we're going to have a conversation for the first half of this among the three of us, and then we're going to take questions for the second half. So people who want to ask questions should write their questions on the index cards that were handed out, and about a half an hour or a little more into the panel, I'm going to ask that you pass them down to the aisle, and they're going to come up, and that's going to be the basis of the questions for the second half. Now, we're lucky tonight to have two people that are uniquely qualified to talk about these issues. Alex Padilla is California's Secretary of State. For those of you that don't know him, his parents immigrated from Mexico. They settled in Pacoima, where he was raised and went to public schools. He graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At age 26, he was elected to the Los Angeles City Council. 2 years later, he was elected to the first of 3 two-year terms as president of the City Council. During that time, he was president of the California League of Cities, and then he got elected in 2006 to the state Senate, where he was chair of Utilities and Commerce, authored a number of major pieces of legislation, and then was elected Secretary of State in 2014, where he has been the leader of, he's actually the president of the Democratic Secretaries of State in 19 states across the country. He's worked hard on electoral issues, election issues that we're going to talk about. He's on the ballot for a second term in November. Please welcome Secretary of State. And our second panelist is a local favorite. Gail Pellerin was born in Torrance, and as I found out, raised in a number of places in South and Central California. She's a graduate of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and the interesting story there is that her father didn't think women should go to college, so she worked her way through on her own to graduate. As a result, she had to go to work right away. She worked for the legislature for 7 years. Then she came 25 years ago to be elections manager in Santa Cruz County. She moved up to county clerk in 2004 and has been reelected every time to additional terms. She's been active in the state elected officials organization, and as we're going to hear, there are many more things that she's responsible for besides elections, and I know as somebody, I was never more surprised, and when my spouse and I showed up to get our marriage license, that we're actually escorted into her office, and she helped us fill it out personally in the clerk's office. So please welcome County Clerk Gail Pellerin. Now let's get right into it and start, and I think I'm not going to use titles, it's just going to be Alex and Gail. Besides, there's two secretaries, that could be confusing. And I thought I'd start with Alex, and I tell a funny story that I was riding in a parade in San Francisco with your predecessor, and among many things it said Secretary of State on the side of the car. And as we're going down Market Street, people would shout, "Out of Iraq! Out of Iraq!" And so I don't think everybody totally understands what a California Secretary of State does. See Bruce McPherson smiling. So why don't you start by just telling us what the Secretary of State does, and in particular about elections.
Sure. And maybe I can delegate to Bruce. He can still answer the question. Well, in a fun way, I like to say, well, a federal Secretary of State is in charge of diplomacy and democracy abroad. Our job is diplomacy and democracy domestically, right? How do we advance civic participation? That's my definition of the job of the Secretary of State. The formal duties and responsibilities are several. There are many. I'll focus on what I call the big four public-facing sides of the agency. Elections, first and foremost, and we'll come back to that and talk about that plenty tonight. But if you look at my budget, the number of personnel positions, the largest division of the Secretary of State's office is what we call the Business Programs Division. So all the entrepreneurs in the audience here know it very, very well. If you're going to start a business in the state of California, the first thing you need to do is register with the state, whether it's forming a corporation, even a nonprofit organization, maintaining your statements of information, filing trademarks. All those sorts of transactions are part of what we do. And we're trying to automate more and more so we can rely less and less on paper. Another aspect of the job, elections somewhat related, is it's known as the Political Reform Division, more commonly referred to as campaign finance. So I am not the compliance officer. I am not the enforcement officer. I'm not the FPPC. Our responsibility here is to gather all the fundraising and expenditure reports of all the state candidates and campaigns, keep them on file, make the information publicly available, especially online. So if you go to our website, you now have two options. Either click on Cal Access or you click on Power Search and search away. You want to follow the flow of money in politics by candidate, by contributor, by campaign. All that data is there because that's one of our responsibilities. I think an often overlooked part of the job, but one that's absolutely fascinating, is I am the custodian of the state's archives. So if you've seen that movie, National Treasure, with Nicolas Cage, you get an appreciation for how exciting the job really is. I will have you know I am not trying to steal the Constitution of the state of California, but I invite you to come visit it because there's actually two, one in English, one in Spanish. The first California Constitutional Convention, which was in Monterey, not too far from here, we were a diverse population from day one, right? And our historical records and documents, the evolution of California has documented that. I wish the current occupant of the Oval Office would respect that, but we have it under our roof. But clearly, if you look back at the last couple of years, the aspect of the job that gets the most attention, rightfully so, is elections. And how do we, from voter registration through reporting of results and auditing, et cetera, ensure that our elections are transparent, secure, and accessible. And that's where I rely on Gail and her 57 colleagues to get the job done on the ground level.
And also in the archives, if you can convince him afterwards to take you on a tour, they have the original land grants and they hand-colored some of them, and they're in a safe that is huge, that is refrigerated and above flood level. And some of the land grants involve right where we're sitting, so it'd be worth seeing. Gail, let's ask you the same thing. What does the county clerk do, just for starters, so everybody has a sense heading into our discussion?
Well, I think I have the best job in the county, so it's one that keeps me very busy, and I want to give a shout out to my staff. If you guys can just raise your hand here. You guys are amazing and wonderful. They're here tonight. My main job, of course, is Registrar of Voters, where I'm responsible for conducting the elections held at the local, state, and federal levels. We manage the voter registration database and do outreach and conduct the election, recruit poll workers, staff the polling sites, and find the polling sites. Let me get another show of hands. How many people in here worked in a polling site? All right, see, I love you. This is amazing, yeah. If anyone who doesn't have their hand up, we're gonna have your hand up next time we do this because we're gonna get all of you recruited. We know where you live too. And so the elections, we're very passionate about the elections process and making sure that voters have access, and we go above and beyond, do whatever it takes to make sure that a voter who wants to vote gets that vote cast and that it's counted accurately and securely and transparently. And So it's great. That's a great part of my job. The other thing I do is I'm the Commissioner of Civil Marriage. So I get to conduct weddings, and I think I've seen some couples here in the audience. I did your wedding or issued your license, and that was yours, issuing the license. So basically I'm the Office of Love and Politics. It just doesn't get any better than that. And I also get to be a passport acceptance agent. So we get to hear about people's wonderful travels all over the world, and we're the office where you file a fictitious business name, and we do a lot of other things like legal process server and document examiner and notary bond, notary. But yeah, Tricia's here. She makes sure I know what I'm
But
doing.
this is also Santa Cruz. People will shout back during the entire program.
I love that. I love that. What is it we do? We do a lot of, and we just have a tremendous staff, and it's just a pleasure and honor to serve all of you.
And now that I know she's in charge of love and politics, we're going to have a spicy set of conversations. Alex, let's just get one thing out of the way. There was a national tweet after the election that said we had 3 to 5 million fraudulent voters in California. Was that true?
Absolutely not true. But let me sort of jump off on that point and reassure you with a couple of things. Like everybody else, right, I'm human, and that 2016 election cycle was quite the roller coaster. And the results of the November 2016 election put me on that cycle of denial, anger, right, depression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, between my wife and I, it was a whirlwind. But we had to, for professionalism's sake, get up. You know, the morning after the election, we had an election to certify. We got 4 weeks. The counties are still processing late vote by mail ballots, provisional ballots, et cetera. Flash forward to Thanksgiving weekend of that November 2016, right? Nothing better for the soul than being surrounded by family and good food, and we had several days of that Thanksgiving celebration. Sunday afternoon, okay, we got to go back to work tomorrow. Is the laundry done? We got gas in the car. And I get a message from my staff, right? President-elect has sent out a tweet about massive voter fraud across the country. Millions of illegal votes. And I thought to myself, gosh, if we respond to every nonsense tweet, it's going to be a long 4 years. And within minutes, right, he tweeted again. He followed up with naming states, including California. So we had no choice but to respond. Defend our honor, professionalism, and integrity, that of Gail's and all the registrars of voters throughout the state of California, all the poll workers. Many of you raised your hand that you help out on election day, right? That is an insult to the professionalism, the integrity, the patriotism of millions of people across the country that give of their time to help conduct our free and fair elections. And because there's somebody with an ego who just can't accept the fact that they did not win the national popular vote, they got to make it up. They got to create scapegoats. They got to start pointing fingers. So I don't know if you want to go down the road of how that led to the creation of the commission and our opposition to it.
I wanted to get it out of the way because it's hanging over this and doing it again.
Safeguards of what we have.
But just on one of those things you said, were you actually asked to serve on that commission?
I was not. So, because there's no proof or evidence, and we've been calling for it repeatedly, right? If you're going to make those kinds of accusations, you got to back it up. And we've been pretty forceful and consistent about it. And so the administration created what's known as the President's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. Headed up by the Secretary of State of Kansas, Cruz, who the ACLU has dubbed as the king of voter suppression. So we knew it was a sham commission, a sham process to begin with. And the first act of this commission, before they even met for the first time, they sent a letter, not just to California, to every single state, requesting, we need, for every registered voter in your state, name, address, date of birth, party affiliation, social security information, vote history, felony convictions, if any, military service, on and on and on. Again, we know where they're going with this. And so I was the first Secretary of State to say no, refuse to cooperate. We led the opposition, which ended up being actually bipartisan opposition, to the point where 7 months later, or about that time period, they were forced to disband the commission. So we protected voting rights, we protected voter privacy, and our reputation.
And Gail, let me ask you, because we actually had the 1983 Santa Cruz City election go all the way to the state Supreme Court over issues, but it was about residency. It wasn't really about non-citizenship or fraudulent voting in terms of double voting or that kind of stuff. How do you guard for any fraud at the local level, and have you experienced anything? I mean, just hands-on, what do you see or what do you watch out for at the local level?
Well, when people register to vote, they provide their driver's license or last 4 digits of their social security card, and then that's double checked at the state level to verify it's a real person. And when you're voting by mail, you sign your vote by mail ballot envelope, and we have to compare that signature to the signature we have on file for you to make sure that is your signature. In 25 years of doing this work, I've had one case where actually a landlord got the ballot for a tenant and voted it for that person and forged the signature. And we did refer that to our district attorney's office for investigation, and she was charged and fined. So it is really important when you sign your vote by mail ballot envelopes that it is your signature in your handwriting. And I think that when people try to, if the thought about committing voter fraud, going in and impersonating somebody or trying to register someone who's not real, I mean, the chances of that are so very, very slim. I think you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than having somebody impersonate you at a polling site trying to say that they are John Laird here to vote. And the reality is that we have those quality control checks with the signature. Or if you go to vote in person, we have these neighborhood polling sites as well where we know people. And so that takes a lot of guts for someone to come in and impersonate that they're somebody else. I think what's happening more is they're trying to divide us by spreading lies and deceit on social media and trying to divide our country and divide our people, and causing a distrust in this system in the hopes that people stay home and don't vote. And that's exactly what we do not want to have happen. We want people to trust the system. And the best way for you to gain that trust, if you have any doubt, is to come and help us. Serve as a poll worker. Work on our logic and accuracy testing board. Come and observe our processes and procedures. I see some teachers out here who tour our offices and come in and see how we program the equipment, how we count the ballots, and how we make sure that every vote counted is counted accurately and securely, and everything we do is transparent. So come on by and watch for yourselves.
And let's just go one, feel free. Let's just go one step further, since in other states they're using the allegations of fraud to do voter ID legislation. And in reading up for this, I read about the Kansas Secretary of State where there were 9 documented cases of voter fraud. They appeared to be people that weren't trying to mislead but misunderstand, and as a result 20,000 people were purged from the rolls, or at least suppressed in laws. So how does this work in other states where the suggestion of fraud leads to laws that a lower voter participation?
It's exactly that. It's this false premise of voter fraud that paves the way for a series of voter suppression policies, right? And we say this false premise it's not because it's just our opinion, it's just our guess, it's just our, the way we think. No, there have been numerous studies, audits, investigations, reports from academia, from government sources, etc., and they all show that does voter fraud exist? Yes, but it is exceedingly, exceedingly rare, right? Infinitesimal, 0.00, X% in terms of it actually happening. But it is presented because it is strong political rhetoric that people respond to advance things like voter ID requirements, to advance things like aggressive purging of voter rolls, to advance things like reduction or elimination of early voting opportunities, or on and on and on. You've seen this playbook in state after state. Voter ID specifically, let me just give you an example of how, because I think at the surface level, people say, well, that doesn't sound too bad, voter ID, we all have some sort of ID. You need an ID to get on a plane. Why don't you need an ID to go vote? Devil's always in the details. You pick the state, Texas, North Carolina, etc. The way they write the voter ID laws, yes, all the standard IDs, driver's license, passports, but then they get to things like, if you have a concealed weapons permit, that's good enough to get into the polling place and into the voting booth. But if you're a student at a state university and you have a state-issued ID because you attend a state university, that's not on the list of eligible IDs for purposes of voting. So it is not a coincidence how these laws are crafted or what their intent is, because collectively, those who advance these voter suppression measures can influence who the electorate is, right? By keeping certain populations from being able to vote or vote easily. You influence outcomes, you influence policy, you influence representation unfairly.
And Gail, one of the things that Alex mentioned was purging of the voter rolls. And maybe in a second he can comment after you do on what happens in some of the other states. But what happens here? It used to be in days long ago with which I am familiar. If you didn't vote in a November election of a gubernatorial presidential year, you were removed from the rolls. What's the policy now, and how does it work?
Right, so if you don't vote in the last two federal general elections and no election in between, we send you a card, a postcard that's forwardable that says, hey voter, where are you? Are you still planning on voting? And let us know. So if we hear from that voter, we'll keep them on the voter file. If we don't hear from them, you're moved to what's called the inactive voter file. So we do not cancel you unless we hear directly from you, or we get information from our resources that tell us who has passed away, or we get information about somebody who has been put in prison for a felony conviction or on parole for a felony conviction, and then they end up in a canceled file. But otherwise, you're inactive. And if you are an inactive voter and you show up to vote, all you have to do is sign under penalty of perjury that this is me and I still live at this address, and then you are eligible to vote. But California has actually just enacted this year where we have same-day voter registration. So every voter has no excuse not to vote. I don't want to hear people say, I'm not registered, I can't vote. You can go to one of our vote centers, where it's either our office or the Watsonville City Clerk's office, and they are tremendous. We're one of the few counties in the state that has a city clerk's office that opens 29 days before an election and conducts voting at the South County operation and providing assistance in Spanish to the voters there. So a shout out to Beatrice and her folks doing that. So, and you can go to any of either our office or Watsonville and register and vote up to and including Election Day. And we also put a vote center up at UCSC, because I am the mother of two college students, one at Davis, who did vote on the last day at the last hour and was able to turn in her ballot to a Davis polling site, and it got back to us and got counted. And if those voters find themselves at UCSC and wake up on election day and go, it's election day, oh my gosh, and they're registered in Los Angeles, they can go to Bay Tree Conference Center and register and vote a ballot in Santa Cruz, and we will count it. And in June, we had 514 voters, 400. We have a lot, over 500 voters who took advantage of that in our county, and it's a great system.
And
It has to be tied to the state voter registration database, the VoteCal system. So California is tied together. So what happens is that LA voters then snagged in real time out of Los Angeles and put in Santa Cruz County, so there's no chance of them voting in another county.
And just, you raised a lot of topics, and I want to get to some of those, but I want to ask Alex, Ohio is one state that comes to mind where they just use purging as a cudgel to take lots of people off the voter rolls. And if you're working with 18 other Secretary of States, you must experience how this is done in other states. What examples are there? What's going on in some of the other places?
Right. So I work with more than just 18 others. I think the breakdown is this. As Secretary of State of California, I'm a member of the National Association of Secretaries of State, a couple of convenings a year. We share ideas, best practices, etc. And by and large, it's, amicable and bipartisan until we get to the topics of things like voting rights, heaven forbid. And unfortunately, there tends to be a little bit of the people, they go to their corner, we go to ours. Across the country, as we stand here today, or sit here tonight, there are 13 elected Democratic Secretaries of State. That's all. A few more if you add appointed secretaries, because in some states it's an appointed position, not elected. But 18, 19, the point is we're significantly outnumbered. And especially if you look at states like Nevada, Colorado, Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Arizona, you see the pattern here. But the issue of what we call list maintenance, as opposed to just purging of voter rolls. How does a voter stay on the rolls versus potentially get dropped off on the rolls? Actually, federal law, as we understand it, and most people will agree, is very clear. The National Voter Registration Act kind of dictates the policy on how you can remove a voter from a roll. As Gail mentioned, if somebody doesn't show up for a couple of federal elections, the elections officials have the option of trying to communicate to that voter, usually a letter or a postcard. Hey, do you still live there? Hey, do you still want to stay on the rolls? If that communication is not responded to, again, the elections officials have the option of moving somebody to the inactive list. And you kind of repeat that process potentially a couple more cycles out before ultimately canceling their registration. Federal law, as I understand it, is very clear. Just because somebody missed an election or didn't show up to vote a couple times, that in and of itself is not grounds for canceling somebody's registration. And that was the issue in this Ohio case. It wasn't that they sent out the postcards or was it after enough elections or whatever. It's whether or not somebody showing up to vote or not by itself is grounds for canceling of the registration. Sadly, dangerously, this United States Supreme Court that we're living under right now upheld their law.
No.
So the good news is it did not mandate that now all the other states have to do it the Ohio way. But it does greenlight any others that are interested in following Ohio's example to be able to do that. And we're already seeing that in other places, Indiana, etc. So there's a real danger there. And again, it all comes back to why it's important to vote, get our friends and neighbors to vote to see how we can influence who's in the House, who's in the majority of the House, in the Senate, and ultimately in the White House after 2020 and longer term, the makeup of the Supreme Court majority to better defend and protect our fundamental voting rights. Because they're not in the spotlight right now. Voting rights are not in the spotlight, they're in the crosshairs right now. In a way that they have been for a long, long time. For more than 50 years, the Federal Voting Rights Act stood to protect us against exactly this type of abuse, right? For so many jurisdictions across the country that used to have to go to the Department of Justice for pre-clearance to change rules about how they could conduct elections, or how people would be able to challenge a change in policy before the damage was done. That protection is no longer there. We can still sue for violations of voting rights that we see, but it's not until after the election's over and the damage has been done and documented. So this purging of voter rolls is just the latest manifestation of, in my opinion, again, that comprehensive voter suppression agenda that we're up against in so many other parts of the country.
In a few minutes, we're going to move to questions, and I think it's time, if you have questions, to pass the cards to the aisle, and volunteers will collect them and we will get them. So if you have questions, do that. And while that's going on, let's do one more major topic, which is sort of election security in with Gail. I know there's a lot of controversy over voting machines. And yet, I'm not sure people even understand how voting machines work and what the security is to the extent that they are used in our county.
Right.
How does that work?
Right. So Santa Cruz County has a paper-based voting system We have ballots that, actually every county in the state does, where voters will vote on a paper ballot. It is scanned at the polling site, or they have the option of voting on the touch screen. So every voter is offered paper or touch screen. The touch screen does offer accessibility components to allow a voter to vote independently and privately. It also has a Spanish ballot on the touch screen unit. And the touchscreens have a voter verified paper audit trail that prints so the voter can verify their printed votes prior to casting the ballot. And all these machines are tested. We go through a logic and accuracy testing that is open to the public, so please come observe us doing that work. And we have an independent logic and accuracy board. I give a shout out to Richard Padilla, who taught me everything I know about elections, who sits on my board for me. And
who apparently is still interested enough to come to
I
the
know,
forum.
I love him. And so we verify that all the machines are counting the votes accurately. We have a pre-marked test deck that gets put through every scanner that's used at a polling site. We have a program that we run on all the touch screens, and then everything, once it's confirmed that it's operating correctly and counting correctly, everything gets locked down and secured with tamper-resistant security seals, and then those are all documented on paper, and then there's a chain of custody that people have to sign off that all those seals are intact. We do check out the voting equipment to our inspectors the night before the election, and it's their job to bring it over in the morning, so they get a sleepover with the voting equipment. And when they bring it in on election morning,
Not bad for the sex and elections.
yeah,
department.
and they don't snore or cause any noise whatsoever. So when they bring that in the morning, 2 clerks other than the inspector check in the equipment to make sure that all the seals are intact. If there's anything that's out of alignment or that's in disarray, they'll call us on our hotline, and we will dispatch a new unit to that polling site. So, and then our system is not tied to the internet at all. They're just dumb machines that are sitting there. They're monitored throughout the entire time. We never leave a voting system that's unattended. And at the end of the night, everything is shut down, and then everything is brought back. And again, we have a security system in place, and everything's audited as it comes in to make sure we have all the pieces election night. So thank you all for being really patient with me election night. Everybody take a deep breath. Because it does take time to bring all this voting equipment and ballots back securely and get them counted accurately and then posted on our website. So if you plan to go to bed by midnight, forget it. You're not going to get the final till after midnight. So stay up, have a glass of Cabernet, and enjoy the results. And then we audit. And we have, again, a shout out to our team at elections. They are phenomenal with their auditing. I mean, Tricia heads up that canvas board, and everything is scrutinized and looked at. And we have done a pilot project on the risk limiting audits, and we're real excited about moving into that system in 2020, other than the 1% we're doing. But if you think about 1% of the votes cast, we take basically 1% of the votes cast in the county and recount them. But every contest has to be recounted. So if I have a contest in, 4 precincts, then I'm counting 25% of the votes. And if there's ever a close race, and election officials love wide margins, and whenever there's a close contest, especially one that may flip from election night to after the vote by mail are counted in provisionals, we will recount and look at every single one of those paper ballots and the paper voter records on the touchscreen to verify the vote. So we go above and beyond, because I don't want to sign a statement of vote that I don't have 100% confidence in, and I don't think that's fair to you either. And so we do take the 30 days it takes to do the final certification of the vote, because we are doing all those extensive audits and balancing and verifying and security seal checks and all that we're doing during those 30 days after the election. So it's locked down. And I also want to give a shout out to our Information Services Department. I don't know if Tammy Weigel's here. I love you to pieces. And she is on it, on our cybersecurity issues. She's monitoring that. In fact, that's probably what she's doing right now if she's not here, to make sure that nobody's penetrating our system. And we're going to be working with the Department of Homeland Security, I think in September, doing some penetration tests as well. So Santa Cruz, you're secure.
But you led perfectly in where I wanted to go with Alex next, because there have been reports that there have been attempts to penetrate the systems and hack into them in a number of states. And Gail referred to, if you just look at the the student voting sort of in real time, canceling from one county to another, you rely on an amazing amount of databases and data information. Do you have any evidence somebody's tried to hack? How do you work to defend the system to make sure that its integrity is protected?
Right. No, and it's a critical part of the job that was underappreciated prior to 2016. Right. So the measures that Gail walked through have been in place for a long time, not just since November 2016. Right. Any voting system to be eligible for counties to consider using anywhere in California first have to be tested and certified that they meet all the security standards that we mandate in California, including paper ballots, or in a few instances that voter verified paper audit trail. Look, I'm a big technology guy, but when it comes to casting our ballots, I love paper, that we can count, that we can recount, that we can audit to ensure the accuracy and the integrity of the vote. That's key. Second, the fact that yes, any bit of the system cannot be connected to the internet, so we make it systematically impossible to hack or rig an election. And then the 1% manual tally afterwards. The hand count's got to match up with the machine count. Otherwise, you got to figure out what went wrong there. So we do all that and have been doing all that. But November 2016 and all the chatter about potential hacking, foreign interference with our elections, I have found it very helpful to think sort of in three different columns or buckets. Number one, it's a question if you ask, was any element of our voting infrastructure compromised? Did anybody penetrate a database, change information, flip votes in the outcome of an election? The answer is no. In 2016, still zero proof that any of that happened. But that's a very different question than were individuals, agents of the Russian government and others involved in a massive misinformation campaign to create concern, doubt, chaos, undermine our confidence in the system? Absolutely. But even then, that's different than, well, was there collusion between a certain presidential campaign and friends of Vladimir Putin? Well, that special counsel Mueller figured that out, right, in due time. So kind of three different things that when you're watching cable news at night, the storylines kind of get blurred. But it's important to think of them in these distinct columns. So our first and foremost job is to make sure our election systems are secure. So we have the things that we do to minimize the risk. What have we done since 2016? Most counties, and I know we've done this at the state level, we've assessed all of our network architecture, our systems with the benefit of not only federal agencies expertise, but private sector expertise too, upgrading servers, firewalls, utilizing better encryption, 24/7 monitoring, all the things from a technology perspective that we should absolutely be doing. And by the way, we have a little bit of funding for it. We need more. But it's not just about machines, right? You can have the best, password protection, firewalls in place, but if somebody in Gail's office or mine still clicks on a link from an email of a long-lost uncle who won the lottery and wants to transfer $3 million, right? Everything's compromised. So we got to focus also on what we call cyber hygiene, right? What are all the best practices for all this state-of-the-art security technology? We got to talk to each other. If there's something irregular going on in Santa Cruz, Gail knows she calls me right away too, not just internally to figure out what's going on, how to contain it, but she should let me know in case I'm seeing it in other counties. Or I can pass it along to see if this is happening in other states as well, and vice versa, right? If our federal partners now observe something in other states and they use the same machines that they use in Santa Cruz, well, they're going to communicate to us right away to be on alert. So that communication and information flow is all of a sudden critically important as well. So our defensive strategies are very comprehensive. It's the infrastructure, it's the people, it's the information and communication flow. And the last bit I'll mention is, yes, thanks to the legislature and the governor, we don't just have additional new funding coming in for upgrading or replacing voting systems, but upgrading our capacity to counter the bad information that we're increasingly seeing, not just on, but especially on social media platforms, right? So we're taking it very seriously and doing everything we can. Thus far, again, zero evidence of any compromise or breach of any type in California, and we're just we're going to keep it that way.
I just want to say too, the partnership that counties have with the Secretary of State's office is incredible. And along the lines that what Bruce McPherson started when you were Secretary of State, you know, just keeping those communication lines open all the time.
We're still doing those monthly calls.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So he learned from you, but thank you.
I'm starting to get the first questions, and one of the themes in the first ones is legislation and what's pending and what's been done. And one of them is there's been the Voter Choice Act. And the Voter Choice Act, one of the pieces of it is to set up the whatever it's called, the voter centers. And I want to ask each of you about that because right now I live in Sacramento a few days a week, and Sacramento was one of the 5 counties that tried this, and it was interesting watching it. And I think Santa Cruz is going to be in the next batch. Why don't you explain what those are and what it is, and then Gail can talk about how it would work here if it moves to here.
All right. So my first initiative when I became Secretary of State was to call for automatic voter registration in California. And thank you. So that was launched late April of this year. And the way that works is as people are going through the Department of Motor Vehicles, anybody who's eligible, right, you still have the same requirements, 18 years or older and a citizen. If you're eligible, as you apply for or renew your driver's license or your state ID, the default now is you're added to the voter rolls, right? You can opt out if you want, but now we make the people who just refuse to be part of our democracy do the work of opting out. The default is you're added to the rolls. By the way, we are registering about 20,000 people a week right now through automatic registration statewide, and for every 20,000 people we register, we're actually updating the record for another 50,000 people who were previously registered but want to maybe update their party affiliation or change their name or request to vote by mail, or the biggest one is changing address, because when we move, we're quick to let DMV know for our driver's license, but we haven't let the Secretary of State or the County Registrar know of our new address. So our voter rolls are improving daily significantly as a result. I mentioned that first because you can't vote unless you're registered first, and that's the way we're moving the needle significantly on increasing voter registration. As the bill was moving its way through the legislature, I had actually questions both from Republican and Democratic legislators. Why do this? Okay, just because you register them to vote doesn't mean they're going to vote. That's right. We should be doing more to facilitate eligible voters actually casting their ballots. So my second initiative was to sponsor the Voters' Choice Act. So it's a new way of administering the elections. 5 counties did it this year, and the best way I can describe it is sort of by contrast, right? Or the way we do, the way our options for voting today are really just 2. Right? You can vote by mail. That's pretty convenient. More and more people are doing it. Statewide, more than 60% of voters choose to vote by mail. But 40% of California is still a big number. Right? There's a lot of people who still prefer to go vote somewhere in person, like my mom. Guess who drives her to the polls every election day? And I believe she has that right. That's her choice. That's her preference. You have that right. Under the Voters' Choice Act, here's how it works. A month before the election, every voter automatically gets their ballot in the mail. You don't need to request it. You don't need an excuse. Instead of just mailing out sample ballots, just mail out the ballot, right? And you give people choices on how to return the ballot, how to cast their vote. If you still buy stamps, you can mail it back. The county would be... Oh, yeah, and not anymore, right? Postage is going to be paid from now on. Thank you, Jerry Brown.
Already in Santa Cruz, we've been doing it for years.
Now the rest of the state is catching up. The county is required to install what are known as ballot drop boxes throughout the county, kind of like a mailbox, but clearly marked for ballots only. and any voter can drop off their ballot to any drop box convenient to them in the weeks leading up to the election. Or again, if you're like my mother and insist on going in person, there's actually a way to improve upon the polling place experience, and it's by modernizing polling places as we have known them to what are known as vote centers. And here's what vote centers mean. With a little bit of technology, we can give each voting location access not just to the list of voters in that neighborhood, but to the list of the voters in the entire county. So what that does is it allows voters the ability to go vote at any location in the county convenient to them. Maybe it's more convenient to vote closer to where we work, or we drop our kids off at school, or by the boardwalk, or the university campus, or the shopping mall, or the movie theater, whatever it is. And it gets better. It's not just on election day. Vote centers are open for 11 days up to and including election day. So you can vote early. You can vote on election day. You can vote over the weekend. For everybody who wants to move election day to a Saturday, this is actually the best of all worlds.
And Sunday.
Right? And Sunday. And that's if you didn't return your ballot by mail to begin with. And vote centers aren't just a place to drop off your ballot. If you need a replacement ballot, Gail will talk to you about ballot on demand and producing your custom ballot on the spot if necessary. Same-day registration is available at every vote center. So if there's an issue with registration or you haven't registered before, you can do that and still cast your ballot, again, on election day and in the days leading up to it. So under the Voters' Choice Act, it's exactly that, more choices for voters, more days, more ways for you to be able to cast your ballot. The 5 county, we had a big increase from the gubernatorial primary turnout 4 years ago to this year. 4 years ago, it was 25% statewide. This year, 37.5%. And that's after adding a couple million people to the rolls. In the 5 counties that did the Voters' Choice Act, they all were above the statewide average, so their increases were even more significant. So I'm excited, and if it's coming to Santa Cruz, then I'll be here to cut the ribbon on one of the first vote centers.
Our turnout was 47%, just for the record.
And then, do you want to add quickly, just for the record, I was handed, I think every single person asked a question. Okay. And so we're going to have to try to get to a lightning round after you respond.
Okay, so just on the vote center, yes, Santa Cruz County is looking into doing this for 2020, and also heads up, the primary in 2020, and for how I would tell they changed the law again, is in March. So our time frame is really going to be very truncated to get this off and running. There's a lot that we need to do to make vote centers happen in Santa Cruz County, and another big component of that is we will have a remote accessible vote by mail ballot. So for persons with disabilities, they would be able to vote from home because they can't be voting on the paper ballot if you are visually impaired. And Veronica's here in our front row on our Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee, and she advises me on all things accessibility-wise. She's been a treasure to have and a great resource for us. But that's another big piece of the vote centers. And so we'll be looking at that. We had a county committee that met this week, and it would involve getting a new voting systems. We want to make sure that we're locked down and secure at all these locations. In Santa Cruz County, we'd probably have 5 vote centers operating for the 10 days prior to and including election day. And then for the 4 days prior, we'd bump it up to 16. And then on the ballot drop box side, we're going to be introducing 2 more ballot drop boxes in Santa Cruz County in November. So we're going to have 10 that are up and running. And in our county, it would never dawn on me to put them inside a building. They're all outside where you have 24/7 drive up, drop off accessibility. So those are all going to be up and running. The one at UCSC, though, is a walk up. It's over in Quarry Plaza. But we're excited, and we're going to probably be putting together a public advisory group too. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about this before we make our final determination.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible, and some of them have been grouped. There's a number of questions about either prisoners or people on parole voting. 2 of them specifically speak to new legislation that allows prisoners to vote. And another question, is there any move in the state to allow people on parole to be allowed to vote? What's the situation with that, and do you know where it's heading?
So bottom line, California is actually on the progressive end of restoration of voting rights for former felons. The law is very clear. If you're in state prison or currently on parole for a felony conviction, you lose your voting rights. Once your time served is done, you can re-register and begin to vote again, unlike other states where it's a lifetime ban or you have to appeal to the governor or something like that. I think the big challenge that I've seen is a lot of misperception, right? Oh, somebody in county jail. No, that's not state prison, right? Misdemeanor convictions. Well, that's not a felony. So the law, again, is clear. Felony conviction, if you're in prison still or on parole still, you lose your voting rights. Everybody else still can register and still can vote. So we have to keep spreading the word because a lot of people disqualify themselves for that, lack of understanding. And yes, there is legislation that's been proposed. I don't think it's been approved yet that would allow felons even in state prison or on parole to be able to participate in our elections.
And this is an easy one. When will early absentee ballots be mailed out?
They're mailed out. This is the trick. Monday is a postal holiday, October 8th. So we will be open and Watsonville will be open, but they don't get mailed until October 9th. And just another shout out, Santa Cruz County, Helen Ruiz Thomas does our voter outreach. She's phenomenal. And we have a great program with our jails and working with Cynthia Chase in our local main jail in Roundtree and Blaine Street. So we are doing a program with our inmates to make sure they have access to voting.
And then there's somebody that's following up on some of the comments that were made earlier. Why don't we want photo ID checks, especially if we have to show IDs to write a check, use a credit card, or get on a plane?
Well, I'll go first and you chime in. Look, the studies that have been done show that the voter ID laws, have the effect of disenfranchising hundreds of times more eligible voters than any ineligible voter it prevents from voting in an election, right? Again, it's all under the false premise of voter fraud. Voter ID is a solution in search of a problem. Voter fraud is exceedingly rare, and everywhere we've seen voter ID laws applied, it has the net effect of disenfranchising a whole lot of eligible American citizens, disproportionately young people, lower income citizens, and communities of color. So it is not a coincidence.
Yeah. And senior citizens.
And senior citizens,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. And places where they do require ID, we've seen cases where they've closed the DMV offices in minority communities where people can't even go and get their ID. And think of it, it's a tax. It costs money to get this ID. And again, in 25 years of doing this work, I have never seen somebody come into a polling site trying to be somebody else and impersonating a voter. It just does not happen.
Gail, there's a question. In the 2016 primary, there were concerns about provisional ballots being invalidated. What percentage of ballots are invalidated, and what are the most common reasons why? And you might want to start by explaining provisional ballots.
I love provisional ballots. They are it's the fail-safe. It's the net to catch people. And we end up counting 90% plus of our provisional ballots. A lot of them are going to go away with same-day registration, though, for those voters who did not get a chance to register. But basically, a provisional ballot is if John has been mailed a vote-by-mail ballot and he goes into his polling site to vote and he doesn't have his ballot to surrender, I can't just hand him another ballot because, maybe he mailed it in and he forgot or something. So what we do is we have you vote, and we always let the voter vote. How many poll workers do I have here? Do we know our chant? Always let the voter vote. Say it with me. Always let the voter vote. We go through this because we always will let you vote. We just put it in a pretty pink envelope, and we will do a research on our end after the election to make sure, number one, John didn't turn in his ballot by mail, and if he didn't, we count it. And also, vote centers will also eliminate these as well with those anywhere ballots. So you can go to any place. But if I am living in Watsonville, but I'm working in Santa Cruz and I don't have time to get home to vote, I can go to a polling site in Santa Cruz and vote a ballot there. And then I'm not voting on all the issues. What we do is we have to duplicate, and Judy's really good at this, duplicating ballots, where we have two-person teams where they take the ballot you voted and the ballot you should have voted, and we transfer those votes over to make sure that you're voting a qualified ballot for you based on where you live. So provisional ballots are wonderful. They should not have a bad name because they really allow and afford a person a chance to have their vote cast and counted.
Okay. And it's a quick plug for the Voters' Choice Act, because
It goes away.
where this election law has been implemented, the need for provisional ballots has dropped 98%. Two main reasons for needing to cast a provisional ballot. Number one, you think you registered to vote on time, but you didn't. That goes away because at vote centers they offer same-day registration. The other reason for provisional ballots, the other big reason, is you went to the wrong polling place. Again, that goes away because under the Voters' Choice Act, anybody can go to any vote center. So imagine how quickly we can get to those final results on election night when we don't have those provisional ballots waiting to be processed for weeks and
Not
weeks and
final
weeks.
till the end. 30 days audit.
Gail, here's a question for you. What voter education is occurring in the high schools? Is the election office involved in the schools? And I've witnessed you answering this question.
Yes, oh my gosh, I love working with students and Helen and her team. And yes, we are out in the schools. High school voter registration weeks are coming up the last 2 weeks of September. We also have National Voter Registration Day coming up on September 25th. And we'll be partnering with the libraries and Starbucks Coffee to get people registered at those locations. And I'm going to do this for you, Helen. We have a September 7th training at Community Foundation building from 2:30 to 4. We are training tons of you on how to register voters. And we are in the high schools pre-registering. 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote. And then when they turn 18, they just automatically be put in the active voter file and their mailed voting materials. So it's a swell way to get our young people involved and engaged. And another thing Santa Cruz County does, which I love and I think it's really exciting, is we partner with Tierra Pacifica Charter School. Justin Trin-Halperin, who might be here with his students, and they do a kids vote program for November elections. And we will have real ballots in the polls with real issues that they then count, and we'll certify that vote separately, of course, from the real election we're conducting. But we will post those results on our website. But it's another great way to get students involved. Their ballots involve issues from kindergarten through 12th grade for students to get out and vote in a polling site. You know, we call it take your parent to the polls, and to get the students involved. So, I think getting young people engaged at an early age is so very important. I mean, both my kids were raised in an elections office, and they have never missed an election because I refuse to pay their tuition until they vote. So, works every time.
If I can make a plug for a member of my team, Tamara Raspberry is over here. She's part of our voter outreach and education team. She will direct you to our website. We have actually a high school portal for information on voter registration, information on pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, information on the statewide student mock election that we conduct in partnership with counties and school districts throughout the state, information on how to organize your own voter registration drive in your community or on campus, how to become a student poll worker.
Oh, yes. We love them. They have so much energy.
And they get a stipend, right? So all those things to further engage young people. So if you're interested, or you know a teacher, an administrator, a student leader, please send them our way and we'll put them to work.
And as for UCSC, we'll be out there for move-in day and registering voters, and we do the same at Cabrillo as well, and when they start school. So we'll be out there working with them as well. So we really try to engage our students, and we do recruit them as poll workers. Ryan Coonerty always makes sure his class gets extra credit for working the polls, and about half of them show up.
Wow. Alex, this question says, I like to follow the website for progressive initiatives. Quite often I see an initiative I would like to sign, but nobody in Santa Cruz is circulating it. It would be really nice if we could sign online. Could you comment?
There's been efforts to allow for, some people call it electronic signatures, some people call it for digital signatures to apply and be counted in the initiative process, but it takes legislation, change the state law to allow for that. But I think it's coming.
And let me just acknowledge that I think a lot of these questions might have been written before parts of the discussion, because you've been very prescient. You've asked about things that have been discussed. So I just want to acknowledge that in case you don't see your question asked. There's a question about the voting security law that did not pass, I guess federally, that provided $250 million, even though there was a bipartisan bill for secure voting. Could you comment on that?
Sure. So two parallel efforts. One, there is pending legislation in the United States Senate known as the Secure Elections Act. I know Senator Harris is a co-sponsor. I believe Senator Feinstein as well. I know both of their offices have called me to get input and see what I think. Bipartisan support. It started off with offering additional funding to states for further, security improvements, et cetera. And it did get into issues like, making a policy that we should be voting on paper ballots and we should do away with electronic machines, all those sorts of things. It was scheduled for a vote in committee last Wednesday and canceled. One of my big frustrations, we're doing all this to be as secure and prepared for November as we are, but we need additional resources and assistance, and Congress has absolutely zero sense of urgency on this. And as I've told reporters, look, I may not try to be partisan, but I can be factual. I know who's in the majority. I know that if they wanted to, they could put the bill up for a vote and pass it. I know the Democrats are ready to vote for it, but that hasn't happened. Separately, in the last 3 weeks or so, there has been one effort in the House, one effort in the Senate, amendments offered to appropriations bills to add $250 million in cybersecurity grants to states for election security. Both of those measures voted down, one in the House, one in the Senate, $250 million in the same action. Big appropriations bills, more than $700 billion approved for defense. Last I checked, protecting the integrity of our elections is a matter of national security. And for less than 1/10 of 1% of what we've sent to defense, we can do a whole lot of good in the elections world. So we're going to keep pressing, we're going to keep making the case, and hope that Congress acts again sooner rather than later. The last time there was significant federal support for elections was after Florida 2000. Right, more than 15 years ago. I wish the worst thing we had to worry about was butterfly ballots and hanging chads. Right, the threats that we face are every day, not once every 15 years. So we have to.
And your office secured getting the money in the budget bill for the state for voting systems.
So in the meantime, the state of California has stepped up $134 million in the state budget for upgrading and replacing voting systems. We love Jerry Brown, so there's a dollar for dollar match by the county required. So fully leveraged $268 million. That's significant. Not everything we need, but a big help.
And there's some HAVA money coming in too.
And so last, what some of the members of Congress will say is, well, didn't we just approve some more money last month? Well, they appropriated $340 million, but this is the last of the monies that was approved to address butterfly ballots and hanging chads, right? The Help America Vote Act dollars were never envisioned to address cyber threats in 2018. So they think, well, we finally gave you the last of the money that we promised you 15 years ago, so that's enough for now, go away.
I have to acknowledge that Alex Padilla has to leave in about 10 minutes, and it's 10 minutes early because he has a flight that he's just going to barely make. Gail and I will round out that last 10 minutes. But I have about 5 questions about motivating people to vote and participation. One is, how do we motivate people to go? How does voter participation compare to other states? how can we increase voter turnout? And somebody suggests, can we have companies give voters a latte if they vote? Another says, I'm concerned with young people that don't think their vote counts. And the last one says they went to 30 households to register to vote. And a lot of people were younger and they did not trust government. They said government hasn't done anything for us. Even though you're both in charge of the process, how do you address the issue of participation and trying to get people to participate more?
Yeah, I think we are going to count on all of you. We need your help to do this. So I think all of you here are voters. I'm sure you are. You're registered. You vote. You vote in every election that you're eligible. Get somebody else. Be the word of mouth. Be out there, promote the vote, and talk to people. Talk to people in elevators. Tracy, you're very good at this. Talk to people at restaurants and line at the grocery store. What I've been telling people and wanting people to do is make a plan to vote. What time are you going to vote on election day? Are you voting by mail? Are you going to a vote center? Are you going to get a ballot early? And I think we just need to talk about it. We need to talk about it with people and encourage people to get out there and vote. And what's so important is that your vote has effects to it. So maybe, voting for Jerry Brown, he was a shoo-in, everybody knew that was going to happen. But what that means is when you have Jerry Brown in office, you get John Laird as our Secretary of Natural Resources. Your excuse not to vote sucks. You really need to get out there and vote. There's no excuse not to do it.
Okay, Alex, top that.
So, impossible. But I'll suggest this. There's sort of like what I call the sort of mechanical, logistical things that we can do to make it easier for people to participate, not put up roadblocks. And then there's the inspiring, intangible things. After every election, there's always some exit poll or some survey from people who didn't vote. Why not? And they're still look, everybody here is probably a very regular voter. I can just see it in your eyes. Right? You're what campaigners call 505s. Right? The problem isn't you. The problem is the 1 of 5 or the never voter. Right? Believe it or not, when you knock on their door, they're not watching CNN or MSNBC. And they probably haven't voted in a while if they've ever voted. So they don't know elections coming up or where their polling place is, all the very basic things that we take for granted. So we got to do more about promoting, etc. One of the reasons why I am so big on automatic voter registration, right? There's nearly 25 million eligible voters in California, and for all that work we've done to go from 17 to 19, almost 19.5 million registered voters, there's still 5.5 million voters out there that aren't registered. If you're eligible to vote in America today but not registered, you don't get the voter information guide. If you're eligible to vote in America today but not registered, you don't get the sample ballot. If you're eligible to vote in America today but not registered, chances are candidates and campaigns are not knocking on your door or calling you during dinner. So the sheer systematic registration of voters, getting them onto the rolls, gets them the voter information guide. They get the sample ballot. They, at least from the smart campaigns and candidates, will get the knock on the door, the phone call, the text, the email, the Facebook, whatever it is, and however campaigns communicate these days. So it creates that opportunity for a conversation about it to begin with. Now, California has struggled with turnout rates. We haven't ranked very high historically. The second to the last record turnout was in 2008 when a young man by the name of Barack Obama was running for president. If only every candidate was that inspiring, right? But we haven't passed that law to mandate that every candidate is so inspiring. So I echo Gail, both in the your excuse sucks, but also that it is on us. It is on all of us, right? And let me just, I'm going to envision a big mirror here up on stage. It's not about us having the answers, it's about all of you. Everybody here tonight is not just here because you're a resident of Santa Cruz. Every person sitting here tonight is not here because you're a registered voter. we're gathered here today because this is indivisible. We came together. We are active because we do not settle for what we see happening in our country right now. So I'm not calling upon you to register because I know you're registered. I'm not calling upon you to vote because I know you're going to vote. We're calling upon each other to organize and to activate both in our own community, outside our own community, and throughout the state of California. And that's how we get more people to vote. And that ultimately is how our democracy, our electorate better represents the people.
And Gail, just before you do that, just to keep Tamara from having a heart attack, he has to go to the airport. Let's thank Secretary Padilla.
Thank you all for having me. I want to thank John and Gail. They've been great up here. And I want to thank you on behalf of my wife, because the reason I'm racing out of here is to catch the last flight home so I can get home to my wife and my 3 boys so I can make breakfast in the morning. Thank you very much.
We're going to go the last 10 minutes with Gail and I, and on the next one, there's a series of questions about the vote count and how long it takes. I just know that...
Come help me then.
No, that when I was first elected to office, and I hate to say it was 1981, 99% of the people in Santa Cruz voted on election day.
Right.
The count was done that night. I was sworn in a week later. We were done. Now it is totally different,
Right.
And so explain
Sure.
why and how it works.
Okay, and just I wanted to just echo him and just say the most important office we have in this state is that of citizen, and that is your job, to be out there and motivating and getting people out to vote. And as far as the count, yes, when people are voting by mail, they tend to hold on to that vote by mail ballot and turn it in late. So election night, we will have less than half of our total vote by mail ballots that have been cast and turned in, because people hang on to them. You know, see, they want to get the last the ads and the mail pieces. So when we get those ballots in the mail or in our drop boxes or at the polling sites on election day, then we've got, you know, we can have 30,000 or plus ballots that we need to sort through. And to count a vote by mail ballot, we have a sorter, and we sort them down to the precinct level. We do a lot of the work on the front end to allow for easy auditing on the back end and an easy recount. So in the event that any candidate wants to, or a voter wants to call for a recount, we can easily find those ballots. We don't do mixed counting like some counties do. So we sort down to the precinct level. We have a human eye that looks at signatures. So they're displayed on a screen, but a human eye will look to verify and say, that's good, that's good, that's good. When a signature does not match or doesn't compare to the signature on file, it gets put into a pile that then Tricia looks at, and then ultimately I look at. And if I don't see comparison, I track you down. I try to find you. I go on Facebook, LinkedIn. I call your work. I call your mother. I call your neighbor. Really, I'm trying to find you to say what is going on. Your signature is so different than what I have on file. We do ask for a phone number or email so we can easily contact you, but you don't normally do that for me, so I have to hunt you down. And it takes a lot of time to do that. And if you are a spouse of somebody or a parent of somebody, and you are someone who overhelps, someone who will sign that envelope for my child who's off at school or too busy to sign their own envelope, don't do it, because it won't be a comparison and we can't count it. We also have voters who don't sign their vote by mail envelopes, and they have 8 days after the election to go ahead and have that signature turned in on another form. And another new law with California that you may not be aware of is that any voter in the state of California can return their vote by mail ballot to any polling site in the state of California. That helped my daughter at UC Davis, who turned in her ballot probably around 7 p.m. on election day at a UC Davis polling site. So she was able to turn that in there, and then it gets received in Yolo County, and then they have to sort them out for all the 57 counties that are remaining, and then send those ballots to us. So we get those in the mail late and get those counted. And then we audit. We audit the precinct. If we have 500 ballots that went to a precinct and I've got 300 that were voted, I need to have the 200 that were unvoted. So we have to do all of our balancing of that. And then we do our recounts. We do the recounts of the touchscreen. We do the recounts of the paper ballots. So we do a lot of that audit work to verify the vote. Again, I don't sign a statement of vote unless I'm 100% certain it is accurate. And we do need help. So if you want to come down and help us, there's nothing more exciting than do a manual recount of ballots. I have had people fall asleep doing watching, not doing the work, but the people watching will fall asleep when they observe a manual recount of ballots. It's like watching grass grow. And so it can go very slow and very tedious. And then we have Judy and her teams that are doing the duplicating of the ballots. When there is a ballot that needs to be duplicated, and people who put interesting marks on their ballot or change their mind and has to be duplicated. So there's a lot of work. And so bear in mind that we are going to great lengths to make sure that everything is done accurately and correctly. And election night is it's a great party. There's a lot going on. We have our receiving centers that are taking in voting equipment and ballots, and all that needs to be securely transported to the central 701 Ocean Street, where we do our centralized tabulation. And Martin does an amazing job. You don't want to keep me away from Martin on election night. Keep me away from the cake. It's a great process to watch happen. It really is a front row seat on democracy to be there election night and see the votes coming in. So I encourage you to do it.
Well, there you go.
And just one more thing on turnout. Turnout in Santa Cruz County, I think our highest was around 86% in November 2008. We had an 84% turnout in November 2016. For me, I say that's a solid B. I think we could do better. If that were a grade on a test, it's good. But June, the election we just had, 47% turnout. How does that happen in Santa Cruz County? We are active, engaged individuals. So this is where I'm really wanting to call upon all of you. Talk to your friends, your neighbors, your churches, your schools. Everywhere you go, promote the vote. Get people engaged and get them activated. We need them at the polls. We need them working, and we need them voting.
There are a lot of questions here about that I think you and Alex have answered. Let me just see if you want to add to this. Because there are a bunch that just say, are you confident that our election is safe and secured? And the thing about it is how you've described it at length, I think answers that question. Is there anything you want to add to the people that have asked that you haven't said already?
I think, if anyone has any doubt, come watch what we do.
And then for the last question, I'm actually going to answer it, which is unique. And that's that there were a number of questions about the Electoral College. One is the three that I held out here to read. I've been told it would be a waste of time to try to abolish the Electoral College. Please explain. Another one says, is there an effort underway to eliminate or modify the Electoral College after the last election? And a third, just should the Electoral College be dismantled? And in some ways, those aren't the right questions, because the answer is yes, it should be dismantled. We should have a majority vote in the country. However, under our constitutional system, that requires 2/3 of the states to approve an amendment. The small states that disproportionately benefit will never vote to change the Constitution. And I have had the unique experience of voting as in the Electoral College 3 times. I voted for Bill Clinton twice, and I voted for Al Gore in the disputed 2000 election. And they don't trust, the framers didn't trust the Electoral College to get together in one place. So everybody gets together in the state capitals and votes and they're submitted. And you can still have faithless electors, people that don't go with the will of their state. However, the Constitution also allows for interstate compacts. And there is a proposal that states enter an interstate compact that, and this would only go into effect if states with 270 electoral votes agree, that basically say that state's electoral votes will go for whoever won the popular vote. And you wouldn't have to amend the Constitution. You would do an interstate compact. And the state of California has already voted to do this and has enacted it into law. And so the question is whether you get enough states to get to 270. And I floor managed the bill when I was in the Assembly, and I think it was in the range of under 100. But if more states do this, you could get to a way that the popular vote winner would win without having to amend the Constitution, and yet still have it be constitutional.
Yeah.
So
That's a
that
great
is
option,
the one
yeah.
solution that's out there.
Let's ratify the ERA. It's about time, don't you think?
On that note, let's thank Gail Pellerin for being part of this. And I think the two panelists tonight gave us a very clear prescription for what's going on and what we have to do, and why organizing to do it with organizations like Indivisible really matter. So thanks for taking the time to attend, and we appreciate how successful this event has been. Thank you.